We begin with an image of divine perfection, the icon of the ancient world, the golden death mask of Tutankhamun. We are drawn to the eyes. They stare out across 3 millennia, their gaze serene and powerful. But look closer. The iconic, deep blue outlines of the eyes and eyebrows are not paint. They are perfectly cut, meticulously inlaid pieces of a vibrant, otherworldly blue stone, flecked with glittering golden specks. This is Lapis Lazuli. To the ancient Egyptians, this stone was the flesh of the gods, the color of the divine night sky. It was a substance more precious than anything, save for gold itself. And yet not a single ounce of it can be found in Egypt or anywhere for 1,000 miles around. This documentary will investigate the mystery of this celestial stone. It is the story of the world's first great luxury supply chain, a 3,000-mile-long pipeline that connected a single remote mountain in Afghanistan to the treasure chambers of the very first kings, a trade that funded the dawn of civilization itself. To understand this pipeline, we must journey back 5,000 years, to the birth of the world's first great civilizations. In the fertile river valleys of the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Indus, humanity was taking a monumental step. For the first time, people were gathering in cities, building massive temples, and crucially organizing themselves under the rule of powerful kings. This was the dawn of the palace economy, a system in which the new ruling class, the kings and high priests, cemented their authority by monopolizing the rarest, most exotic, and most sacred materials on earth. The control of these goods was not a sign of their power, it was the very source of it. Of all these prestige goods, one stone held a place of supreme importance: lapis lazuli. Its deep, celestial blue, peppered with flecks of golden pyrite, was a perfect miniature mirror of the night sky. In a world where the gods were believed to dwell in the heavens, this stone was not merely beautiful. It was a physical piece of the divine realm brought down to earth. To possess it was to possess a direct connection to the gods. This made lapis lazuli an ideological commodity, an indispensable tool for any ruler wishing to legitimize his divine right to rule. The demand was not just for a luxury good, it was for the very substance of kingship. This intense, ideological demand was met by one of the most remarkable facts of global geology. Virtually all of the high-quality lapis lazuli in the entire ancient world came from a single isolated source, a single mountain range in the remote, forbidding province of Badakhshan in modern Afghanistan. This was not a monopoly created by man, but by the planet itself. The story of the lapis lazuli trade is the story of how humanity, in its infancy, built a vast and sophisticated supply chain to connect this single point of supply with the multiple points of demand across the known world. Our investigation will deconstruct this incredible pipeline. We will journey to the almost inaccessible Sar-i-Sang mines, the source of this celestial treasure. We will identify the forgotten middlemen, the proto-urban centers in Iran, and the mysterious trading outposts of the Indus Valley civilization that processed and controlled the flow. We will explore the ravenous demand from the 2 great consumers at the end of the line, the Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia and the divine kingdom of the Egyptian pharaohs. We will analyze the economics of this single-source monopoly, showing how immense value was added at every step of the 3,000-mile journey. This was the world's first great linear supply chain, a river of blue that flowed across the arid heart of Asia, and its currents would help to fund the very dawn of civilization, paying for the rise of the first kings, priests, and royal elites in human history. Before the first trade route can be charted, before the first caravan can be loaded, A desire must be powerful enough to justify the immense risk and effort of the journey. For the Lapis Lazuli Pipeline, that desire was not merely for a beautiful object, but for a piece of the cosmos itself. The value of lapis lazuli in the ancient world was not derived from its utility as a tool, nor from its simple rarity. Its value was ideological, a currency of the sacred. To the first kings and priests of Mesopotamia and Egypt, this was not a stone, it was solidified celestial light, a fragment of the heavens brought down to earth. Understanding the profound power of this belief is the key to understanding the economy of the world's first great luxury trade. So why this stone? What set lapis lazuli apart from all other materials? The answer lies in its unique and breathtaking appearance. It possesses a deep, ultramarine blue, a color of an intensity and saturation found almost nowhere else in the natural world. But it was more than just blue. Embedded within this rich matrix are flecks of golden pyrite, the mineral known as fool's gold. To the ancient eye, in a world without light pollution, this was an uncanny and perfect mirror of the night sky. A deep blue firmament glittering with 1,000 tiny golden stars. This was not a metaphor, it was a literal interpretation. To hold a piece of lapis lazuli was to hold a microcosm of the heavens, the sacred realm of the gods, in the palm of your hand. This unique visual property gave the stone a theological and cosmological significance that no other material could match. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, lapis lazuli was synonymous with the divine from the very dawn of writing. The Sumerians, the first to build great cities like Ur and Uruk, believed the stone was the physical embodiment of the celestial. Their greatest goddess, Inanna, later known as Ishtar, the queen of heaven and earth, was intrinsically linked to it. The epic poems describe her adorning herself with a necklace of lapis lazuli before her descent into the underworld. Her divine authority was symbolized by a lapis lazuli measuring rod and line. To build a temple for her, a king had to decorate its walls with gold, silver, and above all, lapis lazuli, to make it a worthy terrestrial home for a celestial being. The stone was also ground into a powder to create the first and most expensive blue pigment used to color the eyes of divine statues and the murals of sacred temples. It was, in essence, the color of the gods, and its use was a way to imbue any object with divine power. This connection was just as profound, if not more so, in the kingdom of the Nile. For the ancient Egyptians, the color blue was the color of life, of the fertile Nile, and of the heavens. Lapis lazuli, or Hesped as they called it, was the ultimate and most sacred form of blue. The hair of the gods, including the great sun god Ra, was said to be made of pure lapis lazuli. Their skin was gold, and their hair was divine blue stone. When a pharaoh died, he was not just a king, but was believed to become one with the gods. Therefore, to prepare his body for the afterlife, it had to be adorned with the materials of the divine. This is why the funerary mask of Tutankhamun is so lavishly inlaid with the stone. It was not mere decoration. It was a necessary ritual act, transforming the mortal king into an immortal god, his golden flesh and lapis hair making him a true equal to Ra in the underworld. Sacred amulets like the powerful scarab beetle were often carved from lapis lazuli to provide divine protection for the soul on its perilous journey. This deep ideological and religious significance is what created the incredible economy of the stone. It became an ideological commodity, a material whose value was tied to its role in legitimizing power. In the nascent palace economies of the Bronze Age, a king's authority was not absolute. It had to be constantly performed and reinforced. The ability to acquire and display vast quantities of this celestial stone was a clear and public demonstration of the king's divine favor and his connection to the gods. It was also a signal of his worldly power, a sign that his reach was so great, his wealth so immense, that he could command a river of blue stones to flow to his court from the very ends of the earth. The monopoly on lapis lazuli became a monopoly on divine representation. Its use was fiercely restricted to the royal court and the temple priesthood, creating an artificial scarcity that drove its value even higher. This was not a trade driven by the needs of the common person. The demand was from the absolute pinnacle of society, the 1% of the Bronze Age, for whom price was no object. When a Sumerian king commissioned a statue of his patron god, or a pharaoh prepared his tomb for eternity, the cost was irrelevant. The need was absolute. This created a market with a virtually infinite price ceiling. The value of lapis lazuli was not determined by the cost of its mining or transport, but by the immeasurable value of a king's legitimacy and a pharaoh's eternal soul. It was this powerful belief-driven demand that sent the first ripples of the ancient trade across the continent, a demand powerful enough to pull a single sacred stone from a single remote mountain and set in motion the first great pipeline of human history.
Every great river has a source, a fountainhead from which its power flows. For the river of blue that flooded the treasuries of the ancient world, that source was a single, lonely, and almost inaccessible point on the map. It was not a broad region or a series of deposits, but a single group of mines, clustered together in a remote mountain valley in the province of Badakhshan, in what is today northeastern Afghanistan. Known to history as the Sar-i-Sang mines, this was the sole, exclusive supplier of high-quality lapis lazuli to the entire ancient world for over 4,000 years. This was not a monopoly created by the strategic genius of a merchant cartel or the military might of an empire. It was a monopoly created by the sheer brute force reality of geology. The story of the Lapis Lazuli Pipeline begins here, 8,000 feet up in the merciless peaks of the Hindu Kush, in a landscape as beautiful as it is brutal. To comprehend the significance of Sar-i-Sang, one must first appreciate its profound isolation. This is one of the most rugged and inhospitable terrains on the planet. The mines are located in the Kokcha River Valley, a place of stunning verticality, a world of sheer cliffs, deep gorges, and towering snow-capped peaks that soar to over 20,000 feet. The climate is one of savage extremes. The winters are long and brutal, with heavy snows cutting off all access to the valley for more than half the year. The summers are short, hot, and dry. This is a land of avalanches, rockfalls, and flash floods. To even reach this valley required a perilous journey of weeks, on foot, through some of the most challenging mountain passes in the world. For the merchants of Mesopotamia, or the emissaries of the pharaohs, this was the very edge of the known world, a mythical, almost supernatural landscape they called the Mountains of the Gods. The geological processes that created this unique deposit are as violent and specific as the landscape itself. Millions of years ago, the collision of the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates, the same cataclysmic event that raised the Himalayas, also created the immense pressures and temperatures needed for the formation of lapis lazuli. It is a metamorphic rock, a complex cocktail of different minerals, primarily lazurite, which gives it its intense blue color, calcite, white, and the all-important pyrite, gold. This specific geological recipe, the right combination of parent rock, intense pressure, and superheated fluids, occurred with the perfect balance needed for high-quality, gem-grade lapis in only a few places on Earth. And in the ancient world, for the civilizations of the Bronze Age, the deposits at Sar-i-Sang were the only source that truly mattered. Other minor sources existed, for example near Lake Baikal in Siberia, but they were either of inferior quality or even more inaccessible. The mines of Badakhshan held a perfect natural monopoly. This monopoly of supply is the single most important factor in the entire economy of the lapis lazuli trade. Unlike gold, which could be found in small quantities in many different riverbeds, or tin, which had a few competing sources, high-quality lapis had only one address. This meant that every single lapis lazuli object from this period, whether it was a bead from a Sumerian queen's necklace, an amulet from a commoner's grave in Egypt, or an inlay from a royal seal in the Indus Valley, began its life in this one remote valley. This single point of origin allows archaeologists to trace the lines of connection with a certainty that is almost unique in the study of ancient trade. The journey of this stone was not a complex web, but a linear pipeline that flowed outwards from a single tap. The ancient name for the region that contained these mines is a subject of historical debate, but it may be the Aratta mentioned in Sumerian epic poems. These tales described Aratta as a legendary, far-off land, a city of immense wealth, located high in the mountains, rich in gold, silver, and above all, lapis lazuli. The poems tell of the great kings of Uruk sending envoys on perilous journeys across 7 mountains to trade grain with the lord of Aratta in exchange for his precious stones. While the exact location of Aratta is unknown, the stories perfectly capture the Mesopotamian perception of the lapis source. It was a distant, almost mythical place, and acquiring its treasures required a heroic effort. This unique geological fact, a single high-quality source for a high-demand commodity, created an economic dynamic of immense power. The people who lived in and around the Sar-i-Sang Valley and the middlemen who controlled the first leg of the journey out of the mountains held a position of incredible leverage. They were the absolute gatekeepers of the entire world's supply. They could, in theory, turn the tap on or off. The price they demanded for the raw stone was the foundational cost upon which all subsequent profits would be built. The entire, glittering superstructure of the lapis lazuli economy, the trade that would empower kings and adorn pharaohs, rested on the geological accident of this one valley and on the hardy, unknown people who first dared to venture into these mountains of the gods to bring the blue fire of the heavens down to earth.
The mountains of Sar-i-Sang held the treasure, but the stone did not simply leap from the earth. It had to be won, extracted from the hard rock through immense effort, skill, and courage. The very first link in the great Lapis Lazuli Pipeline was a group of people whose names are lost to history, but whose labor was the essential first step in the entire global economy of the stone. These were the first miners, the anonymous, high-altitude specialists of the Afghan Bronze Age. They were not just primitive tribesmen who stumbled upon pretty blue rocks. They were a sophisticated society of prospectors, engineers, and artisans who possessed a deep, generational knowledge of their unique and unforgiving environment. To understand their role is to understand the true human cost and ingenuity at the very beginning of this ancient trade. Archaeological surveys of the Sar-i-Sang region have revealed a landscape scarred by millennia of human activity. The ancient mining operations were extensive. Archaeologists have discovered dozens of ancient mine shafts and galleries, some driven hundreds of feet deep into the mountainside, following the rich veins of lapis lazuli. The primary host rock for the lapis is a hard calc-silicate marble, a material incredibly difficult to work with primitive technology. The tools of these first miners were simple but effective: heavy stone mauls for smashing the rock, and sharpened animal horns and bones used as picks and levers to pry the precious blue nodules from the surrounding white marble. The most powerful tool in their arsenal, however, was fire. The technique of fire setting was a brilliant, if perilous, feat of ancient engineering. The miners would build a massive, intensely hot fire directly against the rock face they wished to excavate. After heating the rock for many hours, they would douse it with water or simply let the cold mountain air do the work. The rapid change in temperature would cause the hard marble to crack and splinter, allowing the miners to then attack the weakened rock with their stone and horn tools. This was an incredibly dangerous process. It filled the narrow, unventilated tunnels with thick, choking smoke, and it risked causing catastrophic rockfalls. But it was the only effective way to break the hard mother rock and access the precious veins of lapis within. The men who performed this work were not just laborers. They were specialists who understood both geology and pyrotechnology. Life for these mining communities would have been dictated by the harsh rhythms of the seasons. The mining itself could likely only take place during the few short, snow-free months of the summer. This would have been a period of intense around-the-clock activity. Entire communities, including women and children, would have been involved in the industrial process. The men would work the tunnels, while others would be responsible for hauling the heavy chunks of rock out of the mines, sorting the material to separate the high-grade lapis from the worthless marble, and preparing the raw stone for the first stage of its long journey. This was a seasonal, highly specialized industrial economy, a community whose entire existence was predicated on the summer lapis harvest. These were not people living in a state of primitive isolation. The archaeological evidence suggests that the communities of Badakhshan were part of a wider cultural and economic network known as the Oxus civilization, or the Bacteria Margiana archaeological complex, a sophisticated Bronze Age society that flourished in the plains of Bacteria to the north of the mountains. The miners were likely not an independent tribe, but a specialized subgroup of this larger civilization, a community of high-altitude specialists who would bring their raw materials down from the mountains to trade in the great urban centers of the plains. In these Bactrian cities, the next stage of the value chain would have occurred. Here, another class of specialists, master craftsmen, would have taken the raw, rock-encrusted lapis and begun the process of refining it. They would have napped it into rough shapes, or blanks, and begun the laborious process of grinding and polishing it, revealing its deep blue color and golden flecks. They were the first to truly work the stone, transforming it from a geological specimen into a desirable commodity. They were the manufacturers who prepared the product for the long-distance traders who would soon arrive. This two-step process, extraction by specialists in the mountains and initial processing by specialists in the plains, was the foundation of the entire lapis lazuli trade. It was a sophisticated system of production that ensured a steady supply of the precious stone was ready for the great caravans that would carry it west, feeding the insatiable demand of the first kings and pharaohs. The journey of the stone had begun, a journey made possible by the forgotten courage and expertise of the world's first high-altitude industrial workers.
Once extracted and roughly processed in the highlands and plains of Bactria, the lapis lazuli was ready to begin its epic transcontinental journey. This was a journey of nearly 2,000 miles, crossing some of the most formidable landscapes on Earth. The pathway it took was not a single named road in the Roman sense, but a well-established corridor of ancient trade, a braided network of paths and tracks that archaeologists sometimes refer to as the Great Khorasan Road or the Great Trunk Road. This was the primary artery of commerce connecting Central Asia to the Near East, a prehistoric highway that was, for millennia, the most important economic conduit on the planet. The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline was not just a route, it was a complex system of human logistics, a chain of transactions and transformations that moved the celestial stone, step by painstaking step, from the mountains of the gods to the workshops of kings. The journey began in the burgeoning urban centers of the Oxus civilization. Here, the raw or roughly shaped lapis was loaded onto the primary transport technology of the region, donkey and ox caravans. While the camel would later dominate the desert routes, these humbler, more resilient pack animals were the workhorses of the rugged highlands and semi-arid plains of Iran and Afghanistan. A caravan journey was a slow, methodical, and dangerous enterprise. The traders had to navigate a landscape of immense plains, treacherous mountain passes, and arid deserts. They faced the constant threats of bandits, extreme weather, and the simple, grinding reality of moving hundreds of tons of goods across a roadless world. The first major leg of the pipeline took the caravans westwards, out of the Bactrian plains and onto the vast high plateau of what is now Iran. This was a land of scattered settlements and emerging political powers, and every leg of the journey required negotiation and the payment of tolls. But one site in this region stands out as a place of singular importance in the story of the lapis trade, Shahr-i-Sang. The name in Persian means the burned city, a reference to the several times it was destroyed by fire. But during the 3rd millennium BC, it was one of the largest and most sophisticated cities in the world, a thriving metropolis in the middle of a desert. Its existence was, for a long time, a profound archaeological puzzle. What could possibly sustain such a large population in such an arid environment? The answer, it turns out, was industry and trade, with lapis lazuli at its very core. The sheer quantity of lapis lazuli found at Shahr-i-Sang is staggering, far exceeding that of any other site from the period, including those in Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have unearthed not just finished beads and inlays, but vast quantities of raw, unworked chunks, and, most importantly, the industrial waste of a massive lapis working industry. They have found tiny stone drill bits, polishing stones, and countless flakes and fragments of the blue stone. This evidence is unequivocal. Shahr-i-Sang was not just a stop on the road, it was the primary industrial processing and redistribution hub of the entire Lapis pipeline. This was a critical stage in the commodities journey. Caravans would arrive from the east, carrying the raw, heavy, and less valuable stone. The master craftsmen of Shahr-i-Sang, specialists in their own right, would then transform it. They would cut away the worthless white calcite, work the stone into high-demand shapes like beads and seals, and polish it to reveal its brilliant blue luster. This value-add process was a key economic function. It made the final product lighter, more beautiful, and far more valuable, ready for the next, even longer leg of its journey to the royal courts of the West. Shahr-i-Sang became fabulously wealthy by acting as the great factory and warehouse of the Lapis pipeline, a city whose entire economy was built on the processing of this single imported raw material. From this great Iranian hub, the pipeline continued westwards. The caravans would have traversed the Zagros Mountains, the great spine that separates the Iranian plateau from the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. This was another perilous journey, controlled by the powerful Proto-Elamite civilization. Finally, after a journey that could have taken many months, the caravans would descend into the lowlands of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here they would arrive at the great Sumerian city-states, the first of the major consumer markets at the end of the line. At cities like Ur, Uruk, and Kish, the now processed and incredibly valuable lapis lazuli would be traded for the goods of Mesopotamia: high-quality textiles, grain surpluses from the Fertile Crescent, and sophisticated manufactured goods. This was the great transaction, the moment that the stone of the mountains was exchanged for the products of the world's first urban civilization. But its journey was, for some pieces, still not over.
The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline, having crossed the formidable mountains and deserts of the Iranian plateau, finally delivered its precious cargo to the world's first great civilization, Mesopotamia. Here in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians and their successors, the Akkadians, were building the world's first cities, inventing writing, and creating the first true kingdoms. For these nascent states, the arrival of the deep blue stone from the mythical Eastern Mountains was not just a commercial event, it was a profound cultural and political phenomenon. The Mesopotamians became the first great consumers of lapis lazuli, developing an insatiable appetite for the stone that would make it the cornerstone of their royal and religious economy. The ability to acquire, control, and display this celestial material was a fundamental strategy in the construction of earthly power. The evidence for this obsession is nothing short of breathtaking, and it comes from one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries of all time, the Royal Cemetery at Ur. Excavated in the 1920s by Sir Leonard Woolley, these 4,500-year-old tombs revealed a civilization of stunning wealth and brutal ritual. The kings, queens, and high priestesses of Ur were not buried alone. They were accompanied to the afterlife by their entire retinues of soldiers, servants, and court musicians, who were sacrificed to serve them in eternity. But it was the grave goods, the objects chosen to furnish the afterlife, that truly revealed the Mesopotamian value system. And everywhere, alongside the gold and silver, was the brilliant celestial blue of lapis lazuli. Consider the magnificent Standard of Ur, one of the masterpieces of Sumerian art. This small, enigmatic box, with its inlaid panels depicting scenes of both war and peace, is a mosaic of precious materials. The red is limestone, the white is shell, but the deep, rich blue that forms the entire background of every scene is pure, high-quality lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. This was not a minor decorative element. It was the foundational color, the canvas upon which the story of Sumerian power was told. Similarly, the famous ram in a thicket statue, a goat rearing up to a golden tree, has its fleece and horns exquisitely carved from lapis lazuli. The great lyre, found in the tomb of Queen Puabi, is a masterpiece of gold and woodwork, but its magnificent bull's head has a beard and hair carved from the finest star-flecked blue stone. These were not just pretty objects, they were instruments of power, and their value was directly tied to the immense difficulty of their acquisition. For a king of Ur to possess such a vast quantity of this foreign stone, to have enough of it to literally pave the background of his royal standard, was the ultimate display of his worldly reach. It was a clear, unambiguous message to his subjects and rivals. My power is so great, my wealth so immense, that I can command a river of blue stones to flow for 2,000 miles from the mountains of the gods directly to my palace. The control of this ancient trade was a key component of royal authority. The palace economy of the Sumerian city-states was in many ways a lapis-driven economy. The kings would have used their agricultural surplus, the immense wealth of grain generated by the Fertile Crescent, to fund the merchant expeditions that brought the stone to their cities. This desire permeated every level of the Mesopotamian elite. The most important tool of administration and commerce was the cylinder seal, a small, intricately carved stone cylinder that was rolled across wet clay to create a unique repeating signature. While common seals were made of ordinary stone, the seals of the royal family, of high priests, and of powerful merchants were almost exclusively carved from lapis lazuli. To own a lapis seal was to be a member of the ruling class, a person whose signature, quite literally, was imprinted with the color of the heavens. It was the Bronze Age equivalent of a black credit card, a symbol of immense economic and social power. The trade was likely managed by a new and emerging class of professional, long-distance merchants. These early entrepreneurs, possibly operating under royal charter, would have organized the caravans, negotiated with the Elamite middlemen in Iran, and borne the immense risks of the journey. The profits would have been enormous, creating a new source of private wealth that existed alongside the traditional wealth of the palace and the temple. The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline was therefore not just funding the kings, but it was also helping to create a more complex and dynamic urban society, with a growing class of wealthy merchants and artisans whose livelihoods were dependent on this international trade. The celestial stone, born in a distant mountain, had found its true home in the bustling, innovative, and power-hungry cities of the Mesopotamian plain.
While the kings of Mesopotamia were the most ostentatious consumers of lapis lazuli, they were not the only major power in the great economic game of the early Bronze Age. To the east, another of the world's great pristine civilizations had blossomed, the Harappan or Indus Valley civilization. Flourishing in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, this was a civilization of immense scale, with meticulously planned cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, a sophisticated system of weights and measures, and a still undeciphered script. For a long time, their connection to the lapis lazuli trade was known but seemed secondary to that of Mesopotamia. But a stunning archaeological discovery in the 1970s would completely reframe their role, revealing them not as passive recipients, but as shrewd, proactive, and incredibly daring players who made a bold strategic move to control the pipeline at its source. The discovery was a site named Shahr-i-Sang. What makes Shahr-i-Sang one of the most remarkable sites in Bronze Age archaeology is its location. It is a classic Indus Valley settlement, with characteristic Harappan pottery, seals, and artifacts, but it is located in northern Afghanistan at the confluence of the Amu Darya and Kokcha rivers over 1,000 miles from the civilization's heartland on the Indus River. It is a remote, isolated island of Harappan culture deep in a foreign land. The question was, why?
Why would this advanced civilization establish a permanent, long-distance colony in such a remote and difficult location so far from home? The answer lies just 50 miles up the Kokcha River Valley, the Sar-i-Sang Lapis Lazuli mines. Shahr-i-Sang was not an agricultural settlement or a military fortress. The evidence is clear. It was a trading post, a colonial emporium, a corporate outpost, established for one primary purpose: to gain direct access to and control over the lapis lazuli trade. This was a stroke of commercial genius, an act of ancient trade strategy that was centuries ahead of its time. While the Mesopotamians were content to wait for the lapis to trickle down to them through a long and expensive chain of Iranian middlemen, the Harappans decided to cut out the middlemen entirely. They made the incredibly bold and logistically complex decision to go directly to the source. The establishment of Shahr-i-Sang would have been a massive, state-sponsored undertaking. It required a deep understanding of the geography of a foreign continent, the dispatch of colonists and specialists on a journey of immense length and danger, and the ability to sustain a remote settlement in a potentially hostile environment. This was not a casual enterprise. It was a deliberate act of economic policy. The Harappans had identified a critical global resource, and they had deployed a long-term strategic asset to secure it. Shahr-i-Sang was in essence the Bronze Age equivalent of a modern multinational corporation setting up a regional headquarters right next to a vital mineral deposit. At Shahr-i-Sang, the Harappans were perfectly positioned to intercept the lapis lazuli as it came down from the mountains. They could trade directly with the local miners, offering their own high-value manufactured goods in exchange for the raw bluestone. The Indus Valley civilization was famous for its mass-produced, high-quality carnelian beads, its fine textiles, and its sophisticated pottery. They could offer these desirable goods at the source, outbidding the long-distance caravans coming from the west. Once they had acquired the lapis, they could process it locally at Shahr-i-Sang, which shows evidence of its own lapis-working industry. They could then ship the valuable finished product back to their home cities via the most direct routes, satisfying the immense demand of their own elite consumers without paying the markups of the Iranian middlemen. This strategic move would have had a profound impact on the entire Bronze Age economy. It introduced a powerful new competitor at the very top of the supply chain. It meant that the flow of lapis was now bifurcated, with one stream flowing west along the Great Trunk Road to Mesopotamia, and another, now controlled by the Harappans, flowing southeast to the cities of the Indus Valley. This likely created a fierce commercial rivalry between the two great civilizations. They were now direct competitors for a single finite resource. The prices, the routes, and the political dynamics of the entire Lapis pipeline would have been shaped by this long-distance competition. The story of Shahr-i-Sang provides a crucial insight into the sophistication and the proactive, entrepreneurial spirit of the Indus Valley civilization. They were not a passive, isolated culture. They were a major player in the world's first global economy, with a deep understanding of resource control, logistics, and strategic commercial advantage. Their mysterious, undeciphered seals, found as far away as Mesopotamia, are the silent witnesses to this vast and complex network of trade. The lonely outpost of Shahr-i-Sang is the most dramatic proof of their ambition, a testament to a civilization that was willing to travel 1,000 miles and establish a permanent colony for the sole purpose of cornering the market on the celestial bluestone.
The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline, having flowed for 2,000 miles from the mountains of Afghanistan through the workshops of Iran and into the palaces of Mesopotamia, began its final and most profitable leg. From the great trading cities of the Levant like Byblos and Ugarit, the precious bluestone was loaded onto ships and ferried across the Mediterranean. Its final destination was the richest, most powerful, and most spiritually focused civilization of the Bronze Age, Egypt. Here, in the kingdom of the pharaohs, the demand for lapis lazuli reached a fever pitch. For the Egyptians, lapis was more than a symbol of royalty. It was a sacred substance, a key ingredient in the state's most important project, the conquest of death. The Egyptian obsession with the afterlife would make it the most valuable commodity in their vast economy, a substance whose celestial properties were deemed essential for a pharaoh's journey to immortality.
As we saw in the Mask of Tutankhamun, the connection between lapis lazuli and divinity was absolute in Egyptian cosmology. The pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings in the world, describe the gods in detail. Their bones are silver, their flesh is gold, and their hair is pure lapis lazuli. This was a literal physical description. The deep blue of the stone, flecked with its golden pyrite stars, was the very substance of the divine cosmos. To transform a deceased pharaoh into a mortal ruler, into the eternal god-king Osiris, his body had to be ritually associated with these divine materials. Gold was abundant in the deserts of Nubia to the south of Egypt, but lapis, or keshbed, had to be acquired through a long and incredibly expensive supply chain. Its extreme rarity and foreign origin only added to its mystique and power. It was the ultimate exotic material, a piece of a distant divine land brought to the Nile Valley at immense cost. This is why lapis lazuli is found in such breathtaking quantities in the unplundered tombs of pharaohs like Tutankhamun. His famous golden sarcophagus is not just gold, it is a masterpiece of inlay work with intricate bands of lapis lazuli, turquoise, and carnelian, creating a rich tapestry of color. His body was adorned with dozens of pectorals, bracelets, and amulets, many of which feature the sacred blue stone as their primary component. Perhaps the most significant objects were the sacred amulets, like the heart scarab, which were placed among the mummy's wrappings. These were often made of or inlaid with lapis lazuli, believed to provide the deceased with the divine protection of the heavens on their perilous journey through the underworld. The sheer amount of the material consumed in a single royal burial was staggering, representing a colossal expenditure of state wealth. The demand from the royal funerary workshops was a constant and powerful engine for the ancient trade. Egypt, however, was at the very end of the supply chain, the final destination of the pipeline. Unlike the Harappans, they did not establish a distant colony at the source, and unlike the Mesopotamians, they did not share a land border with the Iranian middlemen. They acquired their lapis lazuli through a multi-layered, indirect system of trade. The primary route was maritime. The stone, having arrived in Mesopotamia, would be traded westwards to the great Levantine port cities on the Syrian coast. Cities like Byblos in modern-day Lebanon were ancient and crucial trading partners for the Egyptians, the main gateway for the exchange of Egyptian grain and papyrus for the timber, metals, and luxury goods of Asia. Lapis lazuli would have been one of the most valuable commodities passing through these ports. Here, at the final stage, the price of the stone would have reached its absolute zenith. Every middleman who had handled the stone since it left the mountains of Afghanistan, the Bactrian traders, the merchants of Shahr-i-Sang, the Elamite guards, the Mesopotamian wholesalers, and finally the Phoenician sailors of Byblos had added their own markup, their own profit margin to its price. The final price paid by the Egyptian treasury for a pound of lapis would have been astronomically higher than the price paid at any other point in the pipeline. This made it the most profitable leg for the final set of middlemen, the great maritime traders of the Levant. This extreme value is reflected in the texts. The famous Amarna letters, a collection of diplomatic correspondence from the 14th century BC, show the kings of the Near East begging the pharaoh for Egyptian gold. In return, they offer the goods of their own lands. The king of Babylon offers horses, and the king of the Mitanni offers chariots, and they offer what they know the pharaoh desires above all else, lapis lazuli. In one letter, the Kassite king of Babylon sends a gift of lapis, but then apologizes for its quality, explaining that the journey is so long and dangerous that acquiring the best stone is difficult. This correspondence gives us a precious real-time glimpse into the immense prestige and difficulty associated with the lapis economy. For the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, this trade was a vital component of their statecraft. The ability to acquire and display this celestial stone was a non-negotiable requirement of divine kingship. The economy of the afterlife was every bit as important as the economy of the living. And so, the great Egyptian state, with its immense wealth derived from the agricultural surplus of the Nile, became the great financial engine at the end of the pipeline, its insatiable demand for the substance of the gods pulling the blue stone across 3,000 miles of desert, mountain, and sea.
The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline was more than just a remarkable journey. It was a sophisticated economic system, a multi-stage value chain that operated on a transcontinental scale for millennia.
The entire structure of this trade was dictated by a single, powerful fact: the geological monopoly of the Sar-i-Sang mines. Unlike a competitive market with multiple suppliers, the economics of this single-source pipeline were linear and hierarchical. Value was systematically added and profit was systematically extracted at each and every step of the stone's long journey from the mountains of Afghanistan to the markets of Egypt. Understanding this economic ladder is the key to understanding how the pipeline not only funded the great consumer kings, but also created a cascade of wealth that enriched a host of intermediary cultures along its entire length. The economic model begins with what economists call rent-seeking based on a natural resource. The first players in the chain, the miners of Badakhshan and the urban elites of the Oxus civilization, held the most fundamental power: control over the source. The price they charged for the raw or roughly worked lapis was the foundational cost for the entire global economy of the stone. This price would have been determined by a simple but powerful calculus. It was the maximum price they could charge without making the entire long-distance trade unprofitable for the subsequent middlemen. They were the primary producers, and while their profit margins may not have been the largest in the chain, their role was the most secure. Without them, the entire system collapsed. From Bactria, the stone passed into the hands of the first great middlemen, the caravan traders who braved the Iranian plateau. Their business model was based on logistics and risk management. Their costs were immense: the initial purchase of the stone, the expense of donkeys, supplies, and armed guards, and the payment of tolls to every local chieftain whose territory they crossed. Their profit was the margin they could create between the price they paid in the East and the price they could command in the West. This profit was in essence their reward for the immense risk of the journey, the risk of bandits, of storms, of political instability. They were the venture capitalists of the Bronze Age, and their success depended on their ability to accurately price risk. The next, and perhaps most profitable node in the pipeline was the great industrial hub of Shahr-i. The economy of this city was based on the principle of value add. They were not just buying and selling a commodity, they were transforming it. By importing the raw, heavy, and less desirable stone and using their specialized workshops to process it, cutting away the worthless calcite, polishing it, and carving it into finished beads and inlays, they created a product of far greater value. They were the manufacturers and wholesalers of the pipeline. Their profit came from the difference between the price of the raw material and the much higher price of the finished, lighter, and more beautiful product. This industrial processing was a massive source of wealth, allowing them to build a major city in the middle of a desert, a testament to the immense profitability of this value-adding stage. From Iran, the pipeline entered the sphere of the great Mesopotamian city-states. Here, another layer of economic activity was added. The kings of Ur were massive consumers, but their cities were also great commercial centers in their own right. Mesopotamian merchants, operating under royal charter or as independent entrepreneurs, would have purchased the lapis in bulk from the eastern caravans. They would then either sell it to the palace in temple workshops, or they would act as the next set of wholesalers, selling it on to the traders who serviced the markets even further to the west, in Syria and the Levant. This was the nexus point, the great clearinghouse where the prices for the entire western half of the ancient trade network were likely set. The final and most profitable stage was the maritime route from the Levantine ports to Egypt. The Phoenician and Syrian merchants who controlled this leg of the journey were the final link in the chain, and they likely commanded the highest profit margins of all. They were selling the finished product to the wealthiest, most obsessive, and most distant consumer on the planet. They were a world away from the initial costs of mining and transport. The price they could charge the Egyptian treasury would have almost entirely been divorced from the foundational costs, dictated instead by the immense ideologically driven demand of the pharaoh's court. This end-of-the-line premium is a classic feature of luxury supply chains, and it made the great trading cities like Byblos fabulously wealthy. The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline, therefore, was a brilliant, self-sustaining economic ecosystem. The immense demand of the consumer kings in Egypt and Mesopotamia provided the powerful financial incentive that pulled the entire system forward. The geological monopoly of the Afghan mines created a linear, non-competitive supply chain. And at every step of this chain, a different group of specialists, miners, craftsmen, caravan masters, urban wholesalers, and maritime shippers, found their own unique and profitable niche. It was a model that distributed wealth across a vast geographical area, funding not just the pharaohs at the end of the line, but also the rise of specialized industrial cities and powerful merchant classes all along its 3,000-mile length.
For nearly 2,000 years, the Lapis Lazuli Pipeline had been one of the great constants of the ancient world, a river of blue that flowed as reliably as the Tigris or the Nile. The entire economic and political structure of the Bronze Age was built, in part, upon the stability of this long-distance connection. But around the year 1200 BC, the world that had created and sustained this trade was plunged into a period of catastrophic, systemic collapse. The great palace economies that had been the pipeline's primary consumers were extinguished in a wave of violence and social upheaval, and a new, disruptive technology offered a cheap and accessible alternative to the celestial stone. The great age of lapis lazuli did not end overnight, but its central role in the global economy faded, as the world that had desired it so intensely was itself consumed by fire and chaos. The primary shock to the system was the event known to history as the Late Bronze Age collapse. This was not a single event, but a cascading series of crises that swept across the eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. Great cities were burned to the ground, trade routes were severed, literacy was lost in many regions, and entire empires, like that of the Hittites, vanished from the stage of history. The great consumer hubs at the end of the Lapis pipeline were devastated. The Mycenaean palace centers in Greece, with their voracious appetite for amber and lapis lazuli, were destroyed and abandoned. In Egypt, the once mighty New Kingdom was thrown onto the defensive, battling invasions from the Sea peoples and losing its grip on its foreign empire. In Mesopotamia, the Kassite dynasty collapsed, and the region descended into a dark age of poverty and political instability. The economic consequences for the lapis trade were immediate and profound. The pipeline's entire structure was predicated on the existence of a wealthy, centralized, elite class of consumers, the palace bureaucracies and royal treasuries, with an insatiable, ideologically driven demand. When those palaces burned, that entire class of consumers disappeared. The demand for a stone whose primary purpose was to adorn divine kings and furnish their tombs for the afterlife simply evaporated. The complex, high-risk and incredibly expensive supply chain was no longer economically viable. With no one left at the end of the line willing or able to pay the astronomical prices, the incentive to move the stone thousands of miles across a now even more dangerous and fragmented world vanished. The Great Trunk Road, while not completely severed, saw its most valuable and prestigious commodity slow to a mere trickle. Concurrent with this political collapse was the rise of a disruptive new technology that would permanently alter the economy of the color blue, the invention of Egyptian blue. This was the world's first synthetic pigment. Egyptian artisans had discovered that by heating a mixture of silica, lime, copper, and an alkali, they could create a brilliant, vibrant blue pigment with a glassy, crystalline structure known as cupra rivayet. This was a revolutionary achievement. For the first time, a rich, permanent blue color could be mass-produced, on demand, anywhere there was a furnace and the right recipe. Egyptian blue was not lapis lazuli. It lacked the deep, celestial quality and the golden pyrite flecks that gave the natural stone its sacred power. For the highest status, most ritually important objects, like the pharaoh's own funerary mask, only the genuine stone of the heavens would do.
but for a vast array of other applications, for painting temple walls, for creating faience beads and amulets, for decorating pottery, Egyptian blue was a perfect and far more economical substitute. It democratized the color blue. A minor noble or a wealthy merchant who could never have afforded a true lapis amulet could now own a beautiful, vibrant blue object made of faience. This new technology fundamentally altered the market. It shattered the absolute monopoly that the Sar-i-Sang mines had held on the color blue. While lapis lazuli remained a prestige product, it now had a major competitor that was orders of magnitude cheaper and available locally. The demand for the natural stone, already weakened by the collapse of the great palace economies, was now further diluted by this new, accessible alternative. The ancient trade in lapis lazuli never completely disappeared. The stone was too beautiful, its allure too powerful. It continued to be traded in smaller quantities, a niche luxury good for those who could still afford it. But its great age, its time as a foundational pillar of the global economy and a primary engine of state power, was over. The pipeline, once a mighty river, had dwindled to a small, quiet stream, its former glory a memory of a lost and more opulent age.
Our investigation began with the eyes of a god king, with the mystery of a celestial blue stone found thousands of miles from its mountain home. We sought to understand the great pipeline that connected the dawn of civilization to a single, remote Afghan mine. Having traced this river of blue from its geological source through the hands of forgotten miners, merchants, and middlemen, and into the treasure chambers of the first kings and pharaohs, the evidence is now clear and the verdict can be rendered. The trade in lapis lazuli was the world's first great transcontinental luxury supply chain, an economic pipeline driven not by practical need, but by the profound ideological necessity of power and divinity. We have established that the entire economy of this trade was built upon a perfect natural monopoly. The Sar-i-Sang mines in Badakhshan were the sole source of high-quality lapis lazuli for the entire ancient world. This geological fact created a linear, non-competitive supply chain, a pipeline whose immense value was a direct function of the immense difficulty and distance of its journey. Our investigation has demonstrated that the demand for this stone was not merely aesthetic, but deeply theological. Its unique star-flecked blue was seen as a physical piece of the heavens. We have shown how the kings of Mesopotamia and the pharaohs of Egypt, the first rulers to claim divine right, used this sacred material to legitimize their authority. The ability to acquire and display this stone was a public performance of their connection to the gods and their command over the far corners of the earth. Lapis lazuli was not just a symbol of power, it was a necessary ingredient in the formula of ancient kingship. We have charted the pipeline itself, a 3,000-mile artery of ancient trade. We have identified the key players who made it function: the hardy miners of the high mountains, the specialized artisans of industrial hubs like Shahr-i-Sang, the daring caravan masters of the Iranian plateau, and the maritime traders of the Levant. We have also uncovered the strategic genius of the Indus Valley civilization, whose colonial outpost at Shortugai represents a sophisticated, corporate-like attempt to control the pipeline at its source, a clear sign of a competitive global economy even in the early Bronze Age. Finally, we have seen how this entire magnificent structure was brought to its knees by the dual shocks of systemic collapse and technological disruption. The violent end of the Bronze Age palace economies extinguished the pipeline's primary consumer base, while the invention of synthetic Egyptian blue provided a cheap and accessible alternative, forever breaking the stone's monopoly on the color blue. Therefore, the final conclusion of our investigation is this: the lapis lazuli pipeline was a foundational economic pillar that helped to fund and legitimize the rise of the world's first royal elites.
The immense profits generated by this single-source luxury good provided the wealth that built the ziggurats of Sumer and furnished the tombs of the pharaohs. The control over its flow was a primary objective of the first great civilizations, a testament to the fact that from the very dawn of history, the power of kings was inextricably linked to their control over the arteries of long-distance trade.
The Great Pipeline has long since run dry. The cities it nourished, like Shahr-i, have returned to the desert dust. The divine kingships it legitimized have been replaced by new models of power. And yet, the story of the Lapis Lazuli trade endures, a powerful echo from the dawn of civilization. It is a story that reveals something profound about the human condition, our timeless and often paradoxical relationship with value. It is the story of how the most abstract of human desires, the quest for transcendence, for a connection to the divine, can create a vast, complex, and brutally real global economy. The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline is the ultimate testament to the power of an idea. The entire immense enterprise, stretching across a continent and lasting for millennia, was built not on a need for food or a need for better tools, but on a shared cultural belief. It was a collective agreement that a specific shade of blue was the color of the heavens. This idea was so powerful that it could command men to risk their lives in the high mountains of Afghanistan, to brave the deserts of Iran, and to sail the seas of the Mediterranean. It proves that the great engines of history are not always driven by practical necessity, but by the stories we tell ourselves about the world and what is sacred within it. The desire for a piece of the sky, it turns out, was the force powerful enough to create the first global supply chain. This story also provides the foundational blueprint for every luxury goods economy that has followed. The principles that govern the lapis trade are the very same principles that govern the trade in diamonds, in silk, in spices, or in modern designer handbags. Value is created through a combination of rarity, a single source, desire, driven by ideology and status, and distance. The journey itself creates the value. The immense effort, the layers of middlemen, the exotic and mysterious origin, all of these factors were not bugs in the system, they were the system. The Lapis Pipeline is a masterclass in how to transform a raw material into a priceless object through the alchemy of commerce and mythology. Finally, the journey of this celestial stone reminds us that globalization is not a modern invention, but an ancient and enduring human impulse. 5,000 years ago, at the very dawn of urban life, the fates of a miner in Afghanistan, a merchant in Iran, a priest in Mesopotamia, and a pharaoh in Egypt were already inextricably linked. They were all dependent nodes in the single, sprawling network, connected by their shared desire for a single, sacred commodity. The Lapis Lazuli Pipeline is the first great chapter in the long and complex story of our interconnected world. It is a story of how our desires can transcend the boundaries of geography and culture, creating complex webs of dependency and exchange that shape the course of empires. It began when the first kings looked up at the night sky, and in their ambition, decided they wanted to own a piece of it for themselves.